My husband pulled out my chair for another woman at my own kitchen table and his mother clapped. Not loud. A soft, satisfied clap, the kind you do at a restaurant when the right wine arrives. 2 gentle pats of the palms. I heard them from the kitchen doorway where I was standing with a roast on a cutting board and 6 years of marriage in my hands. The woman's name was Lauren. She had driven 3 hours from Boston. She was wearing a dress the color of money, and she sat down in my chair, the one by the window, the one with the view of the harbor, the one I had reupholstered myself last spring with fabric I'd found at the salvage shop on Water Street. And she crossed her legs and picked up the wine my husband had poured her, and she looked out at the view like she was pricing it. Joel, my husband, stood behind her with his hand on the back of my chair and looked at me across the room with the specific expression of a man who believes he is handling something well. "Willa, you remember Lauren," he said. I remembered Lauren. I remembered her from the photographs Joel's mother Constance kept in a leather album in the living room's sideboard, the one she opened every Thanksgiving after her second glass of wine and paged through with the narration of a woman conducting a museum tour. Lauren at the lake house. Lauren at the firm gala. Lauren in the garden that used to be Joel's father's pride. Lauren, who had been Joel's girlfriend for 4 years before I existed in this story and who had left, according to Constance, because she was too ambitious for a small town, which Constance said the way you say someone is too beautiful for a room with admiration disguised as regret. I had never met her, I had seen the album. "Lauren," I said. "Welcome, dinner's almost ready." I set the roast on the table. I took the seat at the other end, the seat that faced the kitchen, the practical seat, the seat where the person who cooked sits because it's closest to what needs attention. Constance sat to Lauren's right. She had arrived an hour before Lauren, which I now understood was not coincidence but staging. She had brought flowers, white roses, her signature, and set them in the center of the table in a vase I recognized as mine. Joel sat between them. He poured more wine. The candles I had lit caught the light in Lauren's earrings. And then Constance looked across the table at Lauren, at her dress and her earrings and her 3-hour drive, and she said it, clearly, with the warm certainty of a woman delivering a verdict she had been composing for years. "We should have kept her." She said it the way you say the weather is beautiful. Fact. Simple. The sky is blue. We should have kept her. Lauren laughed, the modest laugh of a woman who has been told she is the better version of something and has decided to find it charming rather than cruel. Joel looked at his plate. Not at me. At his plate. And I stood up and I went to the kitchen and I took the dessert from the refrigerator. A lemon cake I had made that morning from a recipe my Aunt Helen had written on an index card 30 years ago in handwriting that leaned like it was walking somewhere. And I set it on the counter and I looked at it for a moment. Aunt Helen's lemon cake, in Aunt Helen's kitchen, in a house with a history that nobody at that table had ever bothered to ask about. But here's what none of them knew, not Constance with her white roses and her leather album. Not Lauren in my chair with my view. Not Joel who had pulled out a chair for another woman and looked at his plate when his mother applauded. What none of them knew was what I had found 11 days ago. What none of them knew was that this dinner was not what it appeared to be, and neither was I, and what none of them knew was that I was about to serve dessert. And smile, and say nothing. And by sunrise, every single person at that table was going to understand exactly who they had been sitting with. My name is Willa Byun. I am 32 years old. I run a small bakery out of the kitchen of a house on Osprey Lane in a harbor town in Maine. My Aunt Helen left me this kitchen because she believed I was the kind of person who would take care of what she had built. She was right about that. If you've ever served dessert to a table full of people who didn't know what was coming, drop a comment and subscribe. Because what happened between that lemon cake and sunrise is the part of this story that none of them saw coming. Aunt Helen died on a Wednesday in March, 6 years before the dinner. I know it was Wednesday because I was frosting a cake when my mother called, a 3-layer vanilla for a woman's retirement party at the library. And I remember setting the offset spatula down on the counter and watching a bead of buttercream slide off the edge and hit the floor while my mother said the words, and thinking, I should clean that up, because when the large things arrive, your brain offers you small ones to hold. Helen Byun was my father's sister, never married, 68 years old, a woman who had lived alone in a house on Osprey Lane for 41 years and had run a bakery out of its kitchen for 30 of them. Not a shop, never a shop. She baked from the house. Wedding cakes, birthday cakes, holiday orders, the specific kind of baking that happens when a woman is good enough that people drive to her door instead of the other way around. She had taught me, not formally. Helen didn't believe in formal. She believed in proximity. When I was 7, she sat me on the counter and let me crack eggs into a bowl and didn't say a word when 2 shells went in. When I was 12, she showed me how to temper chocolate by feel, not with a thermometer, with the inside of your wrist. When I was 17 and my parents' marriage was the kind of quiet that fills a house like gas, I drove 40 minutes to Osprey Lane every weekend and stood in Helen's kitchen and baked. And she let me, and she didn't ask questions, which was the kindest thing anyone did for me that year. She had a saying she used when something went wrong with a recipe: a collapsed souffle, a cracked custard, a loaf that didn't rise. She would look at it, wipe her hands on her apron, and say, "The oven doesn't lie, Willa. If it fell, something was off before it went in. Trust what comes out. The oven doesn't lie." I carried that sentence into every room I ever entered after her. She left me the house. Not my father, not my cousins, me. The will was simple, handwritten, witnessed by her neighbor and her mailman, filed with the county. The house on Osprey Lane, its contents, and the recipes in the index card box on the shelf above the stove. To Willa, who understood what the kitchen was for. My father was hurt. He didn't say so. My father communicates in silences the way other people communicate in sentences. But I could read the particular silence of a man who had been passed over by his own sister in favor of his daughter. We never discussed it directly. He attended the closing. He carried boxes. He left before dinner. I moved in that April. I was 26 years old. I had been working at a restaurant in Portland, pastry section, 12-hour shifts, a chef who threw things. I had savings enough for 6 months if I ate what I baked and baked what people ordered. The house was old and strange and entirely itself. 3 bedrooms upstairs, a living room with windows that looked out on the harbor, and a kitchen that Helen had rebuilt twice in 40 years. The kind of kitchen that announces its purpose the moment you step into it. Maple counters she'd had made by a boat builder down the road. A 6-burner stove she'd bought second-hand from a restaurant in Camden and had refurbished by a man who normally worked on diesel engines. An oven that held temperature like a promise. The deed was in my name. The mortgage, there was none. Helen had paid it off in 2004 with 30 years of cake money. The house was free and clear and mine, and I want you to understand that because everything that happened later depends on it. I started the bakery the same month I moved in. Helen's clients, the ones who had been ordering from her for decades, showed up at my door within the first week. Not because I asked, because the kitchen was still warm and the smell was right and they trusted the room. I learned something in that first year that I have never forgotten. A house you own, truly own, no bank, no partner, no name on the deed but yours, is not just a place to live. It is a position. A place to stand that nobody can pull out from under you. Aunt Helen had known that. She had left me the position, not just the property, and for 4 years before Joel it was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The house on Osprey Lane smelled like lemon cake and salt air and 30 years of recipes filed on index cards in Helen's handwriting. And in 11 days, the man I had married was going to try to take it from me, with a dinner and a dress and a woman in my chair. Stay with me, because what I found in Joel's desk drawer changed every assumption I had about my marriage. And what I did before sunrise changed every assumption he had about me. Joel appeared in my life the summer I turned 28. He was visiting from Portland, staying with friends, and he walked into my kitchen on a Saturday afternoon because someone had told him about the cinnamon rolls. He was handsome in the specific way that causes problems, the kind of handsome that makes you check whether the charm is structural or decorative. He asked questions about the baking the way people ask questions when they're genuinely interested, which is different from the way people ask questions when they're interested in you, and the baking is the door. I couldn't tell which kind he was. That should have been my answer. Joel Marchetti moved to town 4 months after the cinnamon rolls. He said it was for the pace of life. He said Portland had gotten too expensive, too fast, too full of people performing their own lifestyles. He wanted something real. He said the word real the way some men say it, with the particular reverence of a person who has never been required to build anything and finds the concept romantic. He worked in commercial property development. Not the large-scale kind, the boutique kind, he said. Small projects, renovation, historic preservation. He had a business card that said Marchetti Development Group and a laptop full of renderings and a way of talking about buildings that made you believe he understood them. I believed him. I want to be clear about that. The belief was not stupid. It was earned by consistent attention, by showing up, by 2 years of being the man who brought firewood without being asked and fixed the porch rail and sat in the kitchen on Saturday mornings watching me frost cakes with the expression of a man who has found the place he wants to stay. We married in the garden. Small, 30 people. His mother Constance drove up from Connecticut and brought white roses and a pearl necklace and the particular bearing of a woman who has opinions about everything and shares them as gifts. Constance kissed my cheek at the reception and held my hands and said, "Joel has always needed someone steady." She said steady the way my mother-in-law Diana had said hobby, with warmth that was actually placement. I was being categorized, filed under functional, not dazzling. I filed that away. After the wedding, Joel moved into the house on Osprey Lane, my house. He never asked whose name was on the deed. I never volunteered it. It didn't seem relevant. We were married, we were building a life, and the house was where we were building it. Constance visited quarterly. Each visit she rearranged something, a throw pillow, a photograph. The spice rack, she alphabetized it, which anyone who bakes will tell you is psychotic. She touched surfaces the way I had seen other women touch surfaces in other stories with ownership. As if repeated contact could transfer title. She brought the leather photo album on the second Thanksgiving. After her second glass of wine, she opened it. "Have I ever shown you these?" she said, though she had, the previous Thanksgiving, in the same chair after the same glass. Lauren at the lake house. Lauren at the gala. Lauren in the garden. Such a lovely girl, Constance said. So driven, she's in venture capital now, you know, Boston. She said it to the room, but she looked at me. Joel said, "Mom." The one-word redirect of a man who has heard this before and has decided that one word is sufficient intervention. It was not sufficient, but I let it pass, because some battles cost more than they're worth. What I did not let pass was the question that opened in me afterward, quiet and specific. Why does a mother keep a photo album of her son's ex-girlfriend in her son's current wife's living room? The answer, when it finally arrived 11 days before the dinner, was worse than jealousy. It was business. If you've ever watched someone arrange your life around you, rearranging your spice rack and your self-worth in the same visit, stay with me. Because what Joel's desk drawer contained was not love letters or photographs. It was something colder, something with numbers on it, and my name in a place it should never have been. Subscribe, because the next part is where the marriage ended and the math began. 11 days before the dinner, I was looking for a stamp. Joel's desk was in the small room off the living room, the room Helen had used as a reading nook, the room with the window seat and the view of the harbor that I loved most in the house. Joel had claimed it for his office the first week after the wedding, which I had allowed because the kitchen was my office and the kitchen was better. The stamp drawer was the top left. I opened it and moved aside the usual debris, pens, paper clips, a charging cable, and underneath, in a manila folder that was not labeled, were 3 documents. The first was a property appraisal. My property. The house on Osprey Lane, appraised at $1.4 million. Conducted by a firm in Portland I had never heard of, dated 5 weeks earlier. My name was not on the request. Joel's was. The second was a loan pre-qualification letter from a bank in Boston. Pre-qualified borrower, Joel Marchetti and Willa Byron Marchetti. Amount, $840,000. Secured by residential property, Osprey Lane. My hands went still. The third document was a business plan, Marchetti Kessler Development Partners. A renovation project, a historic inn on the coast, 20 minutes north. Total investment required, $1.2 million. Partners, Joel Marchetti and Lauren Kessler. Lauren, the ex-girlfriend, the venture capital woman, the one in the photo album. I stood in Joel's office holding 3 documents that told a story my marriage had not told me. My husband had appraised my house without telling me. He had applied for a loan against my house without my signature. The pre-qualification was preliminary, not binding, but it had my name on it. And the money was for a business with his ex-girlfriend. I set the documents back in the folder. I put the folder back in the drawer. I closed the drawer. I went to the kitchen. I stood at the counter. I looked at Aunt Helen's index card box on the shelf above the stove. The oven doesn't lie, Willa. If it fell, something was off before it went in. Something had been off before it went in. I just hadn't checked the temperature. I did not confront Joel. I want to tell you about that decision because it was not easy and it was not immediate, and there were 3 nights where I lay in bed beside him and rehearsed the confrontation in my head, the folder on the table between us, the words, "What is this?" The satisfaction of watching his face rearrange itself. I held that path for 2 of those nights. On the 3rd night, I set it down. Because I had learned from Aunt Helen, from 6 years in a kitchen, from the specific patience of a woman who has baked 1,000 things that needed time, that heat applied too early ruins the structure. You don't open the oven door in the first 20 minutes. You wait. You trust the process. You let the inside set before you test it. I also considered calling a lawyer immediately. Filing something, anything, a protective order on the property, a fraud complaint about the pre-qualification letter, the loud path, the fast path. I held that for 1 afternoon. Then I set it down too, because I didn't have the full picture yet. I had 3 documents in a desk drawer. I didn't know what Joel had actually done versus what he was planning to do. I didn't know whether the pre-qualification had progressed. I didn't know what Lauren knew. I didn't know what Constance knew. I needed to know. And the only way to know was to watch and to document. My Aunt Helen had a recipe for sourdough that took 3 days. You mix, you wait, you fold, you wait, you shape, you wait. 3 days of waiting for 45 minutes of baking. She used to say, the bread knows when it's ready. Your job is to not rush it. I wasn't going to rush it. In 11 days, I did 7 things. First, I took photographs of the 3 documents. Close-up, time-stamped on my phone. I replaced them exactly as I found them. Second, I drove to the county registrar's office and pulled my own deed. I held it in my hands and read my name, Willa Ann Byun, typed cleanly, recorded 6 years ago, no liens, no encumbrances, no other names. I made a certified copy and put it in a folder in my car. Third, I called the bank in Boston. I said I was Willa Byun Marchetti and I was calling about a pre-qualification letter I had received. The loan officer was helpful and had no idea he was being helpful in a direction he hadn't intended. The application had been submitted by Joel Marchetti. It listed me as co-borrower. It had not yet been signed by both parties. It could not proceed without my signature. It had not proceeded. Not yet. Fourth, I called Maeve Callahan. Maeve was 70 years old, had been Helen's neighbor for 3 decades, and was the closest thing I had to a mother in this town. She had witnessed Helen's will. She had brought me casseroles the first month I moved in. She came to the bakery every Friday for a cinnamon roll and left exact change and a comment about the weather that was never about the weather. I told Maeve I needed to ask her something and she said come over, and I sat at her kitchen table and I said, if someone tried to borrow against Helen's house, what would Helen have done? Maeve looked at me over her coffee with the steady eyes of a woman who had seen 41 years of Helen Byun's life from across a fence. Helen would have baked them something beautiful, she said. And then she would have changed the locks. She didn't ask why I was asking. She didn't need to. Fifth, I called a locksmith in Camden and scheduled an appointment for the morning after the dinner. I did not explain why. Sixth, I called Diane Prescott, a family attorney in town, not to file anything, to understand my position. The consultation was 30 minutes. The answer was clean. The house was mine, premarital asset, no commingling of title, no basis for a claim without my consent. The pre-qualification letter, unsigned, was not actionable but was worth documenting. The appraisal conducted without my knowledge was unusual but not illegal. What are you going to do? Diane asked. I'm going to serve dinner, I said. Seventh, I baked a lemon cake from Aunt Helen's index card recipe and I placed it in the refrigerator and I waited. If you've ever prepared for something with the specific patience of a woman who knows what's coming and has decided exactly when to let it arrive, stay with me. Because the dinner was in 2 days, the locksmith was scheduled. The deed was in my car. And the only thing left was to watch 3 people sit at my table and show me who they really were. Subscribe, because what happened at that dinner and what I said before sunrise is the part nobody at that table was ready for. Joel told me about the dinner on a Tuesday evening, casual. Tossing his keys on the counter, my counter, Helen's counter, the maple surface a boat builder had made, and saying, with the practiced lightness of a man who has rehearsed something to sound unrehearsed, "Oh, Lauren Kessler is passing through this weekend." Old friend from Portland. I invited her for dinner Saturday. Hope that's okay. He said it the way Constance said we should have kept her, as a fact that had already been decided. Of course, I said. I'll make something nice. He looked at me with brief surprise, the surprise of someone who had prepared for resistance and received none. Great, he said. Mom's coming up too. Lovely, I said. I stood at the stove and stirred a pot of soup, and I thought about 11 days of preparation, and I understood, with the calm that comes when the last piece of a picture clicks into place, exactly what Saturday dinner was. It was the pitch meeting. Lauren was the investor. Constance was the endorsement. The dinner in my house, at my table, in my kitchen, it was the showroom. Joel was going to present his project in the setting of the asset he planned to leverage. My home, my view, my life made beautiful by 6 years of work. He was going to sell my house to his ex-girlfriend over a meal I cooked. I stirred the soup. I watched the steam rise. The oven doesn't lie. The morning of the dinner, I baked bread. Not for the dinner, for myself. The sourdough, 3 days of waiting, 45 minutes of baking. I had started it on Wednesday, the day Joel told me about Lauren. I had mixed and folded and shaped and waited. And now, at 6 in the morning on Saturday, I put it in the oven and stood at the window watching the harbor go from gray to gold, while the kitchen filled with the smell of something I had made correctly, at the right temperature, with the right timing. Aunt Helen's oven thermometer, an analog dial she'd had since the 70s, the glass slightly yellowed, read 450 degrees. Perfect. I took the bread out at 6:45, set it on the wire rack. Listened to the crust tick as it cooled, the specific sound bread makes when the inside is right. You learn to hear it after enough loaves, the sound of something that held its structure. Joel came down at 7:30. He smelled the bread and smiled, and for 1 second I saw the man who had walked into my kitchen 4 years ago asking about cinnamon rolls. The man who had seemed genuinely interested. The man whose charm I still could not determine was structural or decorative. Smells amazing, he said. It's ready, I said. He did not hear what I meant. He never did. Joel heard words the way he read buildings for their surface. The facade, the curb appeal. What was happening behind the walls was someone else's department. Constance arrived at 4, 3 hours before dinner. She brought white roses, her signature, her claim, and began arranging them in my vase on my table in my dining room. She moved through the house the way she always did, touching, adjusting, straightening a picture frame that was not crooked, moving a stack of my recipe books from the counter to a shelf, making the house camera ready. The house looks wonderful, she said, which meant I have concerns about the house that I am expressing as a compliment. Thank you, I said. Have you thought about what Joel mentioned about the renovation project? So exciting? She adjusted a rose. Lauren is quite the visionary. I look forward to meeting her, I said. Constance looked at me with the appraising expression I had learned to recognize over 4 years, the expression of a woman measuring whether the item on the shelf was performing to specification. You're being very gracious about this, she said. I'm making dinner, I said. That's what I do. Lauren arrived at 6:30. She drove a car that cost more than my first year of bakery revenue. She walked up the path to my door in heels that were not designed for the gravel walkway of a Maine harbor house. And Joel opened the door for her, my door, Helen's door, like a host. She was beautiful. I want to say that without bitterness because it was simply true. Lauren Kessler was beautiful in the polished, maintained way of a woman who invests in her appearance the way she invests in portfolios strategically, with clear returns. She shook my hand. Willa, Joel talks about you constantly. He did not. I knew this the way I knew bread, by what was present and what was absent. She looked around the kitchen with the specific gaze I recognized from Joel's appraisal document, not admiration but assessment. Square footage, condition, potential, and then she walked to the dining room and she sat in my chair, the one by the window, the one with the harbor view, the one I had reupholstered with salvage shop fabric last spring, the one I sat in every morning with my coffee and my index cards and the particular silence of a woman in a house that belongs to her. Joel pulled it out for her. Constance clapped. We should have kept her. If you've ever stood in your own kitchen watching someone appraise your life with their eyes while sitting in your chair, stay with me. Because dinner hadn't started yet. The roast was in the oven. The lemon cake was in the refrigerator. And the 3 people at my table were about to spend the next 2 hours showing me exactly what they had planned. Subscribe, because what they said over dinner and what I did not say is the part that made everything after possible. I served dinner at 7. The roast potatoes, a salad with herbs from the garden Helen had started and I had maintained. Good food. The kind of food I know how to make, not showy, not performative, just right. Joel poured wine. Constance narrated. Lauren listened with the attentive silence of a woman gathering data. And then, between the main course and the dessert, Joel made his pitch. He did it smoothly, I'll give him that. The way a man does when he's been practicing in front of a mirror or a mother or both. He talked about the coast, about the opportunity, about a historic in 20 minutes north that was sitting empty and beautiful and waiting for someone with vision. He talked about Lauren's experience, her fund, her connections, her eye for properties that could be transformed. He talked about partnership, about what they could build. And then he turned to me. The thing is, Willa, to make this work, we'd need capital, serious capital. And the fastest way to access it is, he gestured around the room at my walls, my windows, my kitchen. This, the equity in the house, a line of credit. Secured against the property, he said it the way you propose something reasonable, as if he were suggesting we repaint the bathroom. Lauren set down her wine glass on my placemat and produced from her bag a folder, printed, tabbed. The business plan I had already read in Joel's desk drawer, now in presentation format. The projections are conservative, she said. Joel and I have been working on this for months. While I was baking bread and maintaining the garden and running the business that kept the lights on in the house they were planning to leverage. Constance reached across and squeezed my hand. Warm, encouraging, the squeeze of a woman closing a sale. This is such an exciting opportunity for you both, she said. For the family. I looked at Joel. He was watching me the way he watched me when he wanted something, with attention that was almost the real thing. I looked at Lauren, who had opened a folder on my dinner table beside my roast on my plates. I looked at Constance, whose white roses were arranged in my vase on my table in my house. I'd like to think about it, I said. Joel's face did something brief, a flash of something that was not patience, pressed quickly back into the shape of patience. Of course, he said. Take your time, I'll get the dessert, I said. I went to the kitchen. I took Aunt Helen's lemon cake from the refrigerator. I stood at the counter for a moment with my hands on either side of the cake plate and I looked at the index card box above the stove. The oven doesn't lie. If it fell, something was off before it went in. The marriage had fallen. The something that was off was not new. It had been off before it went in, before the wedding, before the cinnamon rolls, before Joel walked into a kitchen and saw a woman he thought was steady enough to stand on. I carried the cake to the table. I served it on Helen's good plates, the ones with the blue rim, the ones she used for occasions that mattered. I gave Lauren the largest piece. This is extraordinary, Lauren said, and she meant the cake, but I heard the appraisal in it, the reflexive assessment of a woman who prices everything. Family recipe, I said. The house, the baking, the location, Lauren said. She looked at Joel. You were right. It's perfect, it's perfect. 3 syllables that contained everything I needed to know. Joel had been selling this, not just the project, but the setting, my home, my kitchen, my life. He had brought Lauren here to see it, to want it. To say it's perfect in front of me so I would feel the flattery and mistake it for respect. Excuse me, I said. If you've ever sat at a table and watched someone try to sell your life while you poured their wine, stay with me. Because what I did next was not what anyone in that dining room expected. And what I baked that morning at 6 a.m. was not just bread. It was the last thing I made in the version of my kitchen that had someone else's plans hanging over it. Subscribe, because the lemon cake was a goodbye and none of them knew it yet. I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed. I took out my phone. I called Maeve Callahan. She picked up on the second ring. 70 years old, 9 o'clock on a Saturday, and she picked up on the second ring because that's what neighbors do. It's happening, I said. I know, she said. I saw the Boston car in your driveway. Helen would have baked them something beautiful and changed the locks. Yes, Maeve said. She would have. A pause. Are you all right? She said. I thought about the lemon cake on the table downstairs, about the bread I had baked that morning. About 6 years of cinnamon rolls and sourdough and wedding cakes ordered by women who drove to my door because they trusted the room. I'm fine, I said. The locksmith comes at 7 tomorrow. I'll bring coffee, Maeve said. I hung up. I washed my face. I went back downstairs and served second helpings of cake to 3 people who were eating the last meal they would ever eat in my house. If you've ever smiled through a dinner you knew was the last one, carrying plates, clearing glasses, serving cake to people who were planning something they thought you didn't know about, stay with me. Because what happened after midnight, alone in the kitchen, was the moment I stopped circling the decision and made it. Subscribe, because the locks were not the only thing that changed by morning. Lauren left at 10:30. Joel walked her to her car. Through the kitchen window, I watched them stand in the driveway in the porch light, 2 silhouettes, one leaning toward the other, the body language of people who have history and are deciding whether to make it future. I washed the dishes, not as a performance, as a practice. Washing dishes in Aunt Helen's kitchen had always been the place where I thought most clearly, hands in warm water, the harbor dark outside the window, the specific silence of a house after guests have gone. Constance was in the living room with her wine, paging through the leather album. I could hear the soft sound of the pages turning. Joel came back in. He was energized, the particular energy of a man who believes a deal is moving. "That went well," he said. I said, "Lauren's impressed. She said the house is perfect," I said. I heard. He paused, read my tone, decided it was neutral. "Willa, this is a real opportunity. The numbers work. Lauren's fund would cover 60%, and with the equity in the house, your mother's in the living room," I said. "Let's not discuss business tonight." He looked at me for a moment, the specific look of a man recalculating. Then he nodded. "Tomorrow," he said. "We'll talk tomorrow." "Yes," I said. "We will." He went to bed. Constance went to the guest room. I stayed in the kitchen. At midnight, alone in the house I owned, I took out my phone and I typed a text to Diane Prescott, the attorney. "Tomorrow morning, can we meet at 9? I'm ready." She replied at 12:04, which told me everything about the kind of attorney she was. "I'll be there. Bring the deed and the photos." I dried the last plate. I set it in the cabinet Helen had built. I turned off the kitchen light. Then I did something I had not done in 4 years of marriage. I locked the bedroom door from the inside. Joel tried the handle at 12:30, rattled it once, knocked. "Willa, I'm sleeping," I said. "Good night." A pause, then footsteps retreating to the couch. I lay in the dark and I thought about what Maeve had said. Helen would have baked them something beautiful and changed the locks. I had baked the cake. The locks were tomorrow. If you've ever locked a door in your own house and felt for the first time in years that the lock was yours to turn, stay with me. Because what happened at sunrise was not one thing. It was 7 things, each one quieter and more devastating than the last. And by the time Joel came downstairs for coffee, the house on Osprey Lane had become something he no longer recognized. Subscribe, because the morning is where this story arrives. I was up at 5, earlier than the bread, earlier than the light. I dressed in my work clothes, the ones I wore when I was baking for the day, the apron Helen had left me, the shoes that had flour in their seams permanently. Not my good clothes, not my formal clothes. This was a work day. I made coffee. I sat at my chair, the one by the window, the one Lauren had sat in the night before, and I watched the harbor go from black to gray. At 6:45, I heard Constance moving in the guest room. At 6:50, Joel came downstairs. He was wearing the expression of a man who had slept on a couch and had questions about it. "Willa," he said. "About last night." "Sit down," I said. He sat. I placed 3 items on the kitchen table: the certified copy of my deed, my name, no liens, the photographs of the 3 documents from his desk drawer, and Aunt Helen's index card with the lemon cake recipe face up, the handwriting leaning like it was walking somewhere. "The house is mine," I said. "It has been mine since before we married. Your name is not on the deed. There is no loan against it. There will never be a loan against it." Joel looked at the deed, then the photographs, then at me. "You went through my desk," he said. "I was looking for a stamp," I said. "And I found a plan." Constance appeared in the kitchen doorway in her robe and her pearl necklace. She slept in it, which I had always found telling, and she looked at the items on the table and she looked at my face and she understood, faster than Joel, what was happening. Because Constance, whatever else she was, could read a room. "What is this?" she said. "This is my house," I said. "The one your son appraised without my knowledge. The one he listed on a loan application I didn't sign. The one he planned to leverage for a business with his ex-girlfriend." I paused. "The one where you said we should have kept her while she sat in my chair." The locksmith arrived at 7. His name was Ray, and he had the unhurried competence of a man who changes locks for a living and has learned not to ask questions about the morning he walks into. He changed the front door first, then the back, then the kitchen door that led to the garden. 3 locks, 3 new keys. I stood in the kitchen doorway and watched him work while Joel stood in the driveway with his phone to his ear, and Constance sat in the living room with her pearl necklace and her white roses, and the specific stillness of a woman who has just discovered the room is not arranged the way she thought. Maeve appeared at 7:20 with coffee in a thermos and 2 mugs. She walked past Joel in the driveway without a word. She set the thermos on my counter. She poured 2 cups. Helen's oven thermometer is still on the wall, she said, looking at it. Yes, I said. Good, she said. That stays. We drank coffee and watched Ray work. Maeve did not ask what had happened. She had heard enough through 41 years of fence to understand the shape of things. Joel came inside after the second lock was done. Willa, this is insane, he said. You can't just. I can, I said. It's my house. It's always been my house. Diane Prescott will have paperwork for you by Monday. Diane, my attorney, I said. His face did the thing, the rearrangement, the recalculation. But this time there was something else underneath it, not surprise. Something closer to the expression of a man who has been caught and has not yet decided whether to be sorry or strategic. I was going to talk to you about it, he said. The loan, the project, I was going to bring it to you properly. You brought it to me at dinner, I said. With your ex-girlfriend in my chair and your mother applauding. That wasn't Joel. I set down my coffee. Your mother said we should have kept her in my house at my table. While I was standing in my kitchen holding a roast I had made for people who were planning to sell the roof over my head. He was quiet. Here is what I want, I said. I want you out of this house by the end of the weekend. I want your name off every account connected to this address. I want confirmation from the Boston Bank that the pre-qualification has been withdrawn. And I want a conversation with Diane Prescott present about the terms of a separation. Constance spoke from the living room doorway. Her voice was the voice she used when she believed she still had authority in a room. Willa, dear, let's not be dramatic, Constance, I said. I turned to look at her. You brought a photo album of your son's ex-girlfriend into my house every Thanksgiving. You told me we should have kept her at my dinner table. You rearranged my kitchen every time you visited. I paused. This is not dramatic. This is overdue. The pearl necklace lay flat against her robe, still, not catching any light. She opened her mouth. She closed it. It was the first time in 4 years I had ever seen Constance Marchetti with nothing to say. If you've ever said something to someone that was so completely true they had no response, and felt the specific, exhausted relief of a truth that has been waiting years to be said, stay with me, because the morning wasn't finished. What Maeve said to me after Joel and Constance left, standing in my kitchen with Helen's oven thermometer on the wall and new keys in my hand, is the sentence I have carried every day since. Subscribe because the ending is the part that matters most. Joel packed a bag that afternoon. Constance drove him to Portland. He would stay with friends, he said, until they worked things out, and I noticed the phrase worked things out, the language of a man who still believed there was a negotiation happening. There was no negotiation. Diane Prescott sent the first letter on Monday. Clean, specific, with the particular clarity of an attorney who has been practicing in a small town for 20 years and knows exactly how to communicate that the conversation is no longer informal. The bank in Boston withdrew the pre-qualification that same week. A single phone call from Diane, referencing the lack of co-borrower signature and the unauthorized use of my name, and it disappeared like breath on glass. Lauren Kessler did not contact me. I did not expect her to. Whatever Joel had told her about the house, about whose it was, about what was possible, she had been working with incomplete information. A venture capital woman who had been pitched a deal by a man who did not own the asset he was offering. I imagine she was furious. I imagine she directed it at Joel. I did not follow up. The morning they left, Maeve stood in my kitchen with her hands around her coffee mug and looked at me for a long moment. You handled that, she said. I baked a cake and changed the locks, I said. That's not handling, that's Tuesday. She didn't laugh. She looked at the oven thermometer on the wall, Helen's thermometer, the yellowed glass, the analog dial. Helen told me something once, she said. Years ago, before you were born. She was young, your uncle was trying to get her to sell this house after your grandfather died. Said it was too much house for one woman. Maeve paused. She looked at him and said, "A house isn't too much for the person who built the kitchen." I looked at the oven thermometer. "She never sold," Maeve said. 41 years, she never sold. "I know," I said. "What I mean is," Maeve set down her mug. She didn't keep it because she was stubborn. She kept it because she understood something most people learn too late. The place you build from is the place you protect first. Everything else is weather. The place you build from is the place you protect first. I have thought about that sentence every day since. Standing in my kitchen that morning with new keys in my pocket and Helen's recipes above the stove and the harbor going gold outside the window, I understood what my aunt had left me. Not a house, a position, a place to stand. And I had protected it the way she would have. Something in my chest that had been holding steady for 11 days, longer than 11 days, longer than the desk drawer, longer than the dinner, finally let go. I didn't cry dramatically. I sat down at my chair by the window, the one I had reupholstered, the one Lauren had sat in, and I put my head in my hands and I cried for about 2 minutes. For the marriage. For the cinnamon roll morning. For the version of Joel that had seemed real and might even have been real once. For the 4 years of Constance's photo album and her quarterly rearrangements and her steady, warm, devastating categorization of me as the functional one, the steady one, the one you keep because she doesn't leave. I cried for 2 minutes, then I wiped my face. I stood up. I put the kettle on. I had orders to fill. If you've ever sat in your own chair in your own house after the people who tried to take it were gone and felt the specific, devastating, beautiful emptiness of a room that is finally yours again, stay with me. Because the last part of this story is not about Joel or Constance or Lauren. It is about what I built after. And about a Saturday in April, 6 months later, when a gray car idled at the end of Osprey Lane. Subscribe because the ending is the one Aunt Helen always intended. The divorce was clean. Diane handled it with the particular efficiency of an attorney whose file is strong and whose client owns everything being discussed. Joel contested nothing. There was nothing to contest. The house was mine. The bakery was mine. The life on Osprey Lane was mine. He had arrived with a laptop and a business card, and he left with them plus 4 years of somebody else's kitchen and a lesson he may or may not have learned. Constance did not call, she did not write. The photo album, I assumed, was updated. I did not ask. In the 6 months after Joel left, I did 3 things. The first was small but structural. I repaired the chair. Not the upholstery, that was fine. The left rear leg had been loose for a year. I hadn't fixed it because Joel always said he'd get to it. And I had let that stand because in a marriage you let certain things stand until you understand what the standing costs you. I fixed it myself on a Tuesday afternoon. Wood glue, a clamp, 45 minutes. When it was done, I sat in it and rocked and it held perfectly. Some things you carry until you have a reason to set them down. And some things you fix when the person who was going to fix them leaves and you realize you were the person all along. The second thing was larger. I expanded the bakery. Not dramatically, I am not the dramatic expansion type, and I have seen what dramatic expansion costs when the foundation isn't ready. I added a Friday farm market table, which I staffed myself. I added a wholesale line, 3 restaurants, small orders, the kind of growth that happens when people eat your bread and tell their friends. Revenue grew 40% in 6 months. I hired a part-time assistant, a 20-year-old named Greta who had the particular seriousness of a person who has found the work they were meant to do and is quietly astonished by the finding. I taught Greta the way Helen had taught me, not formally, through proximity. She cracked eggs. She tempered chocolate. She learned to hear the ticking of a crust and know what it meant. Third, I opened the kitchen on Wednesday evenings for a community baking class. Free, 6 people. A retired lobsterman named Carl who had never baked anything in his life, and who, on the 4th Wednesday, produced a loaf of sourdough that made him stare at his own hands like he'd never met them. "I made this," he said. "You did," I said. "How you waited," I said. 3 days, you didn't rush it." He looked at the bread. He looked at me. "That's the whole secret." He said. "That's the whole secret," I said. Maeve came to the classes but never baked. She sat at the counter with her coffee and she watched, the way Helen's neighbors had watched for 41 years, from proximity, with attention, a living record of everything the kitchen had been and was becoming. I asked her once why she didn't bake. "I'm the witness," she said. "Every kitchen needs one." In April, 6 months after the dinner, a car idled at the end of Osprey Lane. I was on the porch with my coffee and my order book, the way I was every morning, the specific morning practice of a woman in a house that belongs to her, doing work she built with her own hands. The car was Constance's, Connecticut plates. She had driven, I calculated later, 5 hours. She did not get out. She sat in her car at the end of my lane for approximately 4 minutes, long enough to see the house. The new garden beds I had put in along the fence. The sign by the gate, buy-in kitchen, hand-painted by Greta, the letters leaning slightly the way Helen's handwriting leaned. Long enough to see me on the porch with my coffee. I did not wave. I did not move. The gate had nothing to do. It was a low gate, and its whole job that day was to stand there being mine. After 4 minutes, the car reversed out of the lane. I watched it go. I thought about what Constance had said at that dinner table, with Lauren in my chair and the roast on my plates and my life arranged around her as if it were a setting she was curating. We should have kept her. She had been wrong about the direction of that sentence her entire life. She had spent 4 years looking at me and seeing the functional one, the steady one, the one who stays because she doesn't know how to leave. She had never understood that steady and functional were not the same as weak. That a woman who runs a kitchen, who measures, who times, who trusts the oven is not a woman without options. She is a woman who has chosen this particular option because she knows what it's worth. We should have kept her. You never had me, Constance. You were a guest in my house. I served you dinner. You mistook hospitality for ownership. A lot of people make that mistake. If you've ever been mistaken for something keepable by someone who never understood you were the one doing the keeping, stay with me. Because the last part of this story is not about Constance's car in my lane or Joel's bags in the driveway. It is about a kitchen, an oven thermometer, and a box of index cards that have been growing for 7 years. Subscribe because the ending is the one Aunt Helen always intended. The house on Osprey Lane is 7 years old to me now, which means it is 48 years old to itself and 41 years a bakery and older than anything else on this lane except the harbor and the osprey nest on the piling by the dock. I bake 6 days a week. Sundays I don't because Helen didn't, and some traditions are structural. The index card box is still on the shelf above the stove. I have added 43 cards to Helen's collection, my own recipes, written in my own handwriting, which leans less than hers but is going in the same direction. Greta made full-time last month. She has her own station now. She is 21 and she talks to Doe the way I used to talk to Doe when I was learning, which is to say quietly and with great specificity, and I pretend not to notice because some conversations are private. Carl, the lobsterman, bakes every week now. He brings loaves to the dock. The other fishermen mock him for it and eat every slice. He told me once that baking was the first thing he'd done in 50 years where the result was exactly as good as the effort he put in. No luck, no weather, no market price, just the work and the bread. That's the whole secret, he said. I told you, I said. Maeve still comes on Friday mornings, still brings exact change. Still comments on the weather in a way that is never about the weather. She is 71 now and she moves slower, but her eyes are the same, the eyes of a witness. The eyes of a woman who has been watching this kitchen for over 4 decades and considers it her duty and her privilege. My father called me last week. He calls once a month now, more than before the divorce, which tells you something about the specific math fathers do when they watch their daughters survive something they couldn't prevent. The garden looks good, he said. He'd seen photos, Maeve posts them because Maeve has discovered the internet and is now unstoppable. It is good, I said. Helen would have liked the sign, I know, a pause. My father's pauses are his primary language. You kept the thermometer, he said. The oven thermometer, of course, it still works. Good, he said. And in that one word was everything he had never said about his sister leaving me the house instead of him, and his understanding arrived at slowly over 7 years that Helen had been right to leave it where she left it. Some mornings I stand at the counter before dawn with my hands in dough and the harbor dark outside and the oven warming to the temperature Helen's thermometer says it should be, and I think about the dinner. Not with anger. The anger passed somewhere around the 3rd month, replaced by something less dramatic and more useful. The clear understanding of what had been happening and the clearer understanding that I had handled it. I think about Joel pulling out my chair for Lauren and the soft sound of Constance's clap. About Lauren's appraising eyes moving across my kitchen. About the business plan in the folder Marchetti Kessler, my home reduced to a line item. And I think about the lemon cake, Helen's recipe, the index card in her leaning handwriting. The cake I had served to 3 people who were eating the last meal they would ever eat in my house, baked from a recipe left to me by a woman who understood what a kitchen was for. Constance had said we should have kept her. Here is the thing about that sentence that Constance will never understand. You cannot keep what was never yours, you cannot leverage what you did not build. And you cannot sell a house that belongs to a woman who knows what the kitchen is for. I was never the one who needed keeping. I was the one who did the keeping, the house, the recipes, the temperature, the timing. Every morning for 7 years, I have stood in this kitchen and done the work, and the work has stood. Aunt Helen left me a house and a saying and a box of index cards. She left me the specific understanding that a place you build from is the place you protect first. Everything else is weather. The oven doesn't lie. If it fell, something was off before it went in. Trust what comes out. Joel was off before he went in. I know that now. The dinner was the oven check. The dessert was the timer going off. And what came out was a truth I could trust, that the marriage was not what it had presented itself to be, and the house, the beautiful, stubborn, salt-worn house on Osprey Lane, was exactly what it had always been. Mine. If you've ever been the one holding the house together while someone else was drawing up plans to sell it, this story is for you. Drop a comment. Tell me about the morning you realized the door was yours to lock. Share this with someone who needs to hear that the place you build from is the place you protect first. And subscribe, because around here, the quiet ones always come prepared.